Story 1. Hi all. So you know those moments where you're laying in bed at 3 a.m. and suddenly remember an incredibly embarrassing moment? Well, I just had one of those and thought I'd share this lovely entitled parent story from the past. When I was about 9, my mom was the main troop leader for my Girl Scout troop. There were about 15 or so kids, including myself. While all of us were quite the handful, it was a decent group. My mom wasn't the only troop leader. There were 3 others who consisted of other mothers. The entitled mother in question was one of those troop leaders and had a daughter my age who I'll call Lucy. The mom always tried to insert her opinion about whatever activity we were doing. I always remember as a kid that she would think at least one thing was wrong with whatever we were doing. Examples include, we should have gotten a different salad dressing for our troop dinner. The colors of yarn weren't suitable for a quilt we were all making and donating. We should have used a different dog biscuit recipe that didn't have peanut butter for the biscuits we were making for shelter dogs. I even remember her making another girl cry because she didn't sell a lot of cookies, which normally wasn't a problem. Lucy was a tomboy and always embarrassed at her mother's actions. Anyways, on to the story. Every year, we would help out our local Veterans Center during Veterans Day. This would usually consist of us preparing dishes and desserts for everyone to eat after a ceremony. This year was different. The Veterans Center was unveiling a new memorial, and there was going to be a big celebration. During this celebration, our troop would participate by singing "America the Beautiful" on local TV. To a bunch of 9-10-year-olds, we were extremely excited. The day comes and all of us in the troop are partially jumping with excitement and joy. As we see the cameras from the local TV station, we get ready, all the kids and adults lined up to look nice and within shot. Some important notes: everyone in the troop was participating and nobody was conducting us. This should have been fine as we have done this many times before. Also, the song "America the Beautiful" has 4 verses and a chorus. We were only taught the first verse and chorus as we only had about 1 minute and 30 seconds for the performance. The whole song takes about 4 minutes. So we start singing, the first verse is done, and the chorus happens. All of a sudden, as we are about to end, the entitled mother starts singing the second verse, of which we all try not to look at her. Since we were performing, we couldn't ask what she was doing. We were also 9-10 at the time and didn't think to question adults. She motioned for us to continue, but the problem was, we didn't know the other verses. All the attendees at the event and the news station try to clap to give us a signal to stop. The entitled mother doesn't, and we try to follow along. So to everyone else, it looks as a group of 9 to 10-year-olds plus the adults are mumbling the song trying to follow along, while the entitled mother is screaming her lungs out trying to cover for everyone else. Each time the chorus cycles through, everyone claps hoping the performance would stop. It doesn't, and eventually half the group gives up and smiles awkwardly while the entitled mother finishes her performance. Everyone claps begrudgingly for the 5th time and immediately moves to the next event. The entitled mother even took a bow before going off stage like the rest of us. All of us kinda looked at each other, trying to figure out what happened while the troop leaders were huddled in a group. The rest of the ceremony finished, albeit 3 minutes late, and we continued on to go eat lunch. My mother was talking with the event coordinator while I was eating lunch beside her. She asked why we performed the whole song, when they agreed on just the first verse and the chorus. My mother had to awkwardly smile and say, "It didn't go according to plan." Meanwhile, while the troop tries to recuperate, the entitled mother is going up to people praising the troop and how the performance did so well with Lucy at her side. Lucy was clearly embarrassed but continued with her mother, who proudly shook hands and declared the performance a success. While the troop has since disbanded and I haven't seen the entitled mother in over a decade, me and my mother still don't know why she did what she did. Story 2. I'm not super sure this is malicious compliance, but it sure felt like it at the time. English is not my first language, and sorry about formatting. When I got into college, country-wide regulations determined that on top of all class hours, each student should complete a total of 120 extra hours of course-related activities by the end of their course. in order to be able to graduate. According to the college I attended, those extra hours could be extra courses, internships, projects, and so on. And each certificate I presented as proof would be valid in full. So if I, for example, took an extra course of 8 hours, they would take these 8 hours off of the total 120 and bring the total I had yet to complete to 112. So on my fourth and final year of college, I decided to check on that just to guarantee everything was in order, and I wouldn't have trouble graduating by the end of the year. Yes, I know, I should have done that sooner. Imagine my surprise when I realized there were tens of hours missing, and I had not reached the end goal of 120 extra hours yet, even though I spent my first 3 years in college taking part in every project or extra course I could find. I decided to check with the person in charge of computing those extra hours, thinking maybe some of my courses didn't qualify or whatever. They then told me that yes, all of them did qualify, and all of them had already been discounted from the total 120. And yet, I had not reached the goal. I was convinced there must be some misunderstanding, and was told I should check the rules, as they were available on the website. Reading over the rules, it was very clear that all of my certificates were considered valid, that I should complete 120 extra hours, and that each certificate should have their full hour value considered. Then I found the rules for the same course, but for the group that began college a year after mine. Apparently, the government changed some rules, and my college changed with it. The group that started college after me only had to complete 78 extra hours, and their certificates would only have a percentage of their hour value contribute to it. So if they got a certificate of 8 hours, it would be evaluated on how much it related to their course, and a percentage was applied to it, which then would turn it into, say, a 3-hour value certificate, reducing 120 hours to 117. I reached the conclusion that my college started applying those new rules, and considering only the percentage of the certificates, for all students, including my group. But they conveniently forgot to change the grand total of extra hours we had to reach. My group still needed to complete 120 extra hours in order to be able to graduate, but our certificates were now worth less. Silly mistake, right? I tried pointing out to the person in charge of the certificates that there were 2 sets of rules and there was a mix-up. But they told me, I don't make the rules and you have to follow them like every other student here. Well, gladly, but which set of rules? So I gathered both sets of rules, the document that showed when I had started the course, screenshots of the system where those extra hours were shown, and wrote a very long letter asking them why did they choose to maintain part of the rules, the total extra hours required, from 1 year, but then apply the certificate validation guidelines from a set of rules of the following year, all of it mentioning and quoting the specific articles of each set of rules. Then I went to the administrative office to hand it in and request a protocol number I could follow up on. Less than a week after that, the student group chat blew up. The extra hours system had been updated, and basically, me and all of my classmates had already reached our total of extra hours because of it now correctly computing our certificates. Never got an answer to that letter though. Story 3. This happened several years ago when my ex and I were going through a heated divorce custody battle. While we were married, we had a couple of conversations about how rich people hide their assets to avoid paying taxes. I've never had enough assets to do this, but she somehow got the idea that I was and told her attorney that I was laundering money and hiding income. It was more likely the heat of the moment, as divorce custody battles often come down to. I couldn't even afford my own attorney, so I represented myself. Her lawyer wasn't a total jerk, but he clearly was out to get me, and he talked down to me like I didn't deserve to breathe the same air. One day, I got a letter in the mail from him requesting an updated income declaration form and 3 years of financials. It had a very long list of things to include. I own a communications tech company that was in the super startup phase back then. Money was already tight. I was trying to get this business off the ground with no financing. I was finishing my MBA with scholarships and loans, so paying for copies and postage or driving this 30 miles to his office meant eating peanut butter and saltines for a week. So I called him to explain my situation. He all but called me a liar and didn't believe I couldn't afford it. I was put off by that, and I said this was taking time away from business I needed to handle. To which he replied, and I'll never forget this, "Well, according to your income declarations, you're not that busy. What do you do all day?" He then said if he didn't get these documents, he would consider my previous filings as fraudulent, tell the judge, contact the DOT, and also alert the state tax agency and IRS. Probably an empty threat, but I'm no lawyer. eFax is one of the services my company provides, and at this time it was relatively unknown. So I asked him if he has a fax machine. He said he had a fax/scanner/copier device, then said what law office doesn't have a fax machine, and I suddenly got an idea. Okay, I said to him, I'll put together and fax whatever I can. Okay, Mr. Lawyer, you want 3 years of financials? You got it. I scanned to PDF every receipt I could find. McDonald's receipt from 5 years ago. Won't hurt to include it. CVS receipt. It's 3 miles long. Perfect. They get the $1 off toothpaste coupons too. I downloaded every bank statement, credit card statement, purchase orders from vendors, and every invoice I sent to clients. I printed to PDF the entire 3-year accounting journal, monthly/quarterly/annual balance sheets, cash flow statements, P&Ls. Not only did I PDF 3 years of tax filings, but every single letter I received from the IRS and state tax agency, including the inserts advising me of my rights. It took a while, but I was a few days ahead of the deadline. I made a cover page black background with white lettering. Wherever I could, I included separator pages in all caps in the biggest, boldest font that would fit on the page in landscape, 20 room and 20 receipts, 20 room and 20 taxes, etc. I merged everything into a single 150-plus page compressed PDF and sent the document using my eFax system. Every hour or so, I received a status email saying the fax failed. That's weird. Well, they're getting this document. So I changed the system configuration to unlimited retries after failures to keep redialing until it went through. Weird, I was still getting status email failures. I'll delete the failed emails and keep the successful ones after it eventually goes through, I thought. Problem solved. 2 days later, a lady from his office called and asked me to stop sending the fax. Their fax/scanner/printer/copier had been printing non-stop. It kept getting paper jams, kept running out of ink, and they had to keep shutting it off and back on to print. I explained that her boss told me to send this by the deadline or else he would call the DA and IRS. Since I didn't want a call from the DA or the IRS, I would keep sending until I got a success confirmation. I suggested they just not print until my fax completes, but she didn't like that. She asked me to email the documents, and I told a little white lie that my email wouldn't allow an attachment that big. Unless her boss in writing agreed to cancel the request or agree to reimburse me for my costs to print and ship. I said I would continue to fax until they confirm they have received every page. She puts me on hold, and the attorney gets on the line. He said forget sending the financials. I said that I would need this in writing, so I will keep sending the fax until he sends that to me. He asked me to stop faxing, and he would send it in writing, and I said send it in writing first, and then I'll stop. Long moment of silence. Click. About 20 minutes later, I received an email from his assistant with an attached, signed letter in PDF that I no longer needed to provide financials. The letter then threatened to pursue sanctions in court or sue me for interfering with their business. Every time I saw him after that, the lawyer never brought up sanctions, lawsuits, criminal referrals, or financials again. Story 4. This happened a week ago, and I've just gotten over the shock and finished giving my company statements. I work part-time in a chocolate shop, and we give out samples to customers. On this particular day, the sample contained a hazelnut praline. Here in the UK, there has been a massive rise in allergen awareness, so we're all very well trained in advising customers. I am working on my own in the store on a very quiet day. Cast, entitled Mother, annoying son about 4 years old, and me. The entitled mother and annoying son walk into my store. Me, "Hi, can I offer you a chocolate? It's a praline, so it contains hazelnuts and milk." The entitled mother takes the chocolate. "I'll have one, but my son is allergic to nuts. Is there anything he can try?" Now, even though it's not company policy, my store keeps an open box of plain dark chocolate to give to people with allergies because we like to be nice. Me. I do have to warn you that everything may contain traces of nuts, but I do have some chocolate he could try with no nuts in the recipe if you agree. She agrees, and I get the chocolate out. So far so good. She actually comes across as quite nice. He greedily grabs 2 chocolates, and she picks one up as well. I internally roll my eyes, but keep a smile on my face. He immediately spits it out, and she starts to complain. Entitled mother. What is this? This is boring and flavorless and disgusting. It's just our dark chocolate. It's the safest for people with allergies to eat. Well, I got a fancy chocolate, and my son, who loves chocolate, got something with no flavor. It's like you're punishing him for having allergies. Give him something nicer to try, or I won't buy anything from this company ever again. I spend a lot of money in this company, and you don't want to upset me. He's screaming and jumping around over at our wall of chocolates, and because he is young and can't read, he picks up a bar that contains nuts. Annoying son. Want this? I want this. I want this. Let him try this. Miss, I'm not allowed to open packets to let people try a chocolate, and also. She cuts me off as I go to explain about the nuts. If you don't open it, then I will. She rips the packet out of the boy's hands. He has been screaming the whole time, and this just makes it worse. I panic. Me. Miss, it has nuts in it. How dare you shout at me? You're just saying that so I don't open it. She opens the packet. You can literally smell the praline as she does, but she breaks off a large chunk of chocolate and shoves it into the boy's mouth as he screams and cries. The moment he tastes it, he stops screaming and starts happily chomping the chocolate, and she instantly appears to calm down. Her voice changes back to how she was when she came in, if a little more patronizing. Entitled mother. See, that wasn't so hard. I'll buy this because he likes it, even though you lied about it having nuts. I have never seen an anaphylactic shock before, and I thought it always happened instantly so when he didn't swell up straight away. I assumed she had been lying to get a different chocolate. The entitled mother clips her son into his buggy and then comes to the till to pay and takes a moment rummaging in her bag to find her purse. I realize the store has gone very quiet and immediately look at the buggy thinking he must have fallen asleep. The boy's face is very red and beginning to swell a little. He looks super disorientated and can't make proper sounds as his throat swells. I realize this is the beginning of an allergic reaction. The entitled mother turns and screams. Thankfully, I work in a shopping mall, so I hit our button that alerts emergency services to the store. In my panic, I just start yelling. Me? Do you have an EpiPen? The entitled mother is clearly in shock and just starts making this high-pitched whimpering noise and nods while pointing under the buggy. I stick my head out of our store door and yell for the responders. I'm pretty much in tears at this point. Thankfully, the mall responders arrive and take over. They are first aid trained and get the EpiPen. They also call 999. They administer the medicine and have the son laying flat until an ambulance can arrive. The mom is clutching my arm the whole time. I nearly feel sorry for this woman until I remember this is her fault. The ambulance arrives and takes them away. I called my manager and she let me close the store until my coworker arrived, and I started giving statements to everyone. My company, the mall, the police, who also turned up with the ambulance. I got the rest of the day and the next day off. Thankfully, the boy recovered, so there is a happy ending, and the Child Protective Services were contacted via the police to report and review this neglect situation. Story 5. The company I worked for had a quite old-fashioned attitude to the workplace. The workforce was divided into boiler suits and suits or workshops and office. They regarded office as educated, professional and honest, and workshop as stupid, half-heartedly and petty thieves. This was not a view I agreed with, I had come from a company where everyone from janitor to general manager were treated the same and could have an input. If something went wrong in design or manufacturing, it was often the guy working the machine or fitted the parts who spotted it and came up with the correction. In my new place, the office would not accept input from the workshop unless they really had to. Workshop had to clock and account for every minute, whereas offices were on the honor system. We were trusted to input our own hours, and we usually just entered our 8 hours per day despite usually working more. Sometimes a lot more because we were professional in our work ethic. In my old place, everyone clocked. It was no big deal, but suggesting that it happened here was like suggesting that office workers were untrustworthy. Then there was Bob. Bob turned up about 8:30 and left about 3:30 and somehow still managed to log 8 hours per day. We had a half-hour lunch break. We could extend it, but had to log it and work the time back. He took long lunches of about an hour or so. He was also a heavy smoker, and about 3 to 4 times an hour Bob would pop outside for a smoke. Everyone knew about Bob, including HR. We knew that Bob was on a shaky peg for a while because his working hours were getting shorter and shorter while still being charged at 8 hours. Something had to give. HR had an easy job. Have a word with Bob and get him to work the hours he claimed. Put him on an RAW, remedial action plan, or else fire him for misaccounting hours. Instead, HR decided to instigate a new policy that everyone on site would clock and would have to account for their hours on site. At no point did HR actually talk to anyone in the office. They just seemed to come up with this plan based on what they thought went on. Engineers were generally happy with this, although a few did grumble about honor and trust. HR just shrugged their shoulders and shifted the blame on to the European Working Time Directive and said that it was the new normal. Nothing we can do. Honest. You don't trick engineers because we like rules, and sure enough, some of the engineering team researched it and found out that HR were just using EU law to railroad through a new process. We did need to record working hours, but nowhere did it say we had to use an electronic clocking system to do it. The old system fulfilled the requirements of the law just fine. The new clocking machines were fitted in every entrance to the office block. We were all given swipe cards and training on using the new system. We could have pointed it out to HR, and indeed some people tried, but the decision had already been made and they pushed ahead with it. We all knew what was coming, and we continued on as normal, waiting for the end of the month. At the end of the month, the project billing controllers went nuts. While 1 or 2 people were genuinely stealing time from the company, the rest of us were under-accounting for our time. Engineers were on a flexible working day. As long as we did core hours and did our 8 hours, then we were okay. Anything over 8 hours was banked, and at the end of the month was either paid as overtime or flexitime. I nominally started at 7 a.m., but I was usually in by 6:40, and we worked on the job so I could leave at 3:30, but it was often closer to 4. Most of us were the same, but we usually just rounded to an 8-hour day. Suddenly, the projects lost 3-4 hours of free overtime per person per week with an office of around 300 people. That is a hitload of time, and that had to be paid as overtime or banked as flexitime as per our contract. 1 or 2 managers suggested that we just adjust our time to the previous hours, but falsifying clocking hours was gross misconduct and a sackable offense, so they went back in their box pretty quickly. HR told it to log our time accurately, and so we did. HR refused to back down because EU law, which we knew that this was rubbish, and so the productivity figures went down, in some cases by over 10%. Cost went up as we had to be credited with all the extra time, and so we all got at least a flexi day per month that we never had before. Thanks, HR. All you needed to do was to have a word with Smokey Bob and his likes, and all would be well. But because you wanted to avoid an awkward conversation, we all get extra holidays. Woohoo. Edit. A few questions on why we didn't log the whole hours. To be honest, I don't know. It was the culture in my new place, and I just adopted it. Stupid probably, but I was the new start, and you don't really want to rock the boat in the early days as you are first out, and I could be out without any reason in the first few months. In my previous place we clocked, so I had no problem with the change. The culture of a place, and the fine detail is something that is hard to find out during the application and interview process. Story 6. As a warning, this post does involve a person who is on hospice care. The malicious compliance, however, did not in any way pose a threat to the patient, as I had planned for that. My job is a bit strange. I work for a company that provides equipment, beds, O2, wheelchairs, etc., to patients on hospice care. This can be one of two ways: one in home with family, or two in an assisted living facility. This story involves the latter. I got an order today for an emergency O2 setup. This normally includes an O2 concentrator, think specialized air compressor, a couple of backup tanks, a tank cart pouch, and all the tubes and equipment for those. I immediately noticed that this order is odd. First, on the order are two of our biggest O2 tanks outside of liquid O2, M60 for those in the medicalgas field. These are large 24-pound tanks of O2 that are reserved usually for high-liter flow patients or those who live in excess of 2 hours from their nearest warehouse. While this on its own isn't odd, that fact that it was relatively close to my warehouse and the concentrator was only a 5-liter one had me questioning. On top of that, the order also had one of our smallest tanks, B tank, which are the kind you usually see people carrying in pouches while out walking. Third, there was a tank cart for a third size of tank, E tank. That is our standard, but wasn't in this order. And finally, to top it all off, there were no regulators, which are devices that are needed to extract the O2 from the tanks in a controlled manner. And given the order, there should have been two different kinds, as M60s take a different regulator than E or B. Obviously, this order was wrong, and I wanted to make sure I was providing the correct equipment. I figured either the hospice company had a non-nurse input orders, pretty common, which resulted in accidentally getting M60 instead of E-tanks. A standard O2 setup for our company is 2 E-tanks and 1 B-tank with each concentrator in case of emergency or travel, or they had forgotten to add the regulators and just added the cart out of reflex. I decided to call the hospice nurse, whose number was in the patient notes, and clarify what equipment was needed. "Hi, this is X from X Health Company. I'm calling in regards to your order for your patient," I tell her. "Yes," she said that with the nastiest tone you can imagine. I tell myself she's had a stressful day, as healthcare is brutal, then tell her, "I have a few questions regarding the equipment ordered. Some of the equipment is incompatible and/or missing." She cuts me off. "I know what I ordered. Just hurry up and bring it. Can't you see it's a stat order?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm just trying to ensure that we're providing the correct equipment for the patient. Some of this equipment doesn't seem needed and others are missing key parts. I'm a nurse and you are just a delivery driver. You don't know what you're talking about. Do not question my decisions and just bring what I ordered right now." "Right away, ma'am. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Now, I may not be a nurse, but I've been doing this a while, so I go ahead and load up the order. But I also load the regulators that might be needed, as well as the standard O2 tanks just in case. While I was down to maliciously comply, I didn't want to endanger a patient. I figured I'd let the facility staff know, give them the extra equipment, and let the hospice nurse suffer when the facility reported on her incompetence. I get there and screen into the facility, where I'm directed to the nurse's station for the patient's unit. I have all the equipment ordered by the caring nurse on a cart, and I'm going to give her one more chance. When I get to the nurse's station, the facility nurses point me in the direction of the hospice nurse. I stop to talk to her, trying to show her the issue. She immediately shuts me down again and tells me to just do my job. She then tells me the room number and walks off. I get to the room and am surprised to see the regional supervisor for the hospice company, who I had met a few times before, as she liked to greet all the new patients when she was in the area. We got to talking, and this is how it went. "Hey, are you here to get the patient set up?" "Yep. Although there might be an issue with the order." I then wheel in the cart. "Why do you have those tanks? The patient is on 2 liters. They don't need that." I figured it was a mix-up and tried calling the nurse to confirm, but she very rudely insisted that I bring this out exactly as she ordered it. She also didn't order any regulators. "What? What if the facility loses power or the concentrator goes down? I tried explaining, but she just insisted on bringing this. Don't worry though, I've got extras in my truck. Do you want the normal O2 setup? Yes, thank you. I'll be sure to look into this nurse's conduct. I did my order, chatted with the facility staff and left, and didn't see Karen or the manager again. I thought that was the end. But it turns out that the manager called my boss while I was out doing the rest of my orders. Apparently he wanted to thank me for knowing what I'm doing and letting him know. They started looking into Karen's other patients and found that she was constantly ordering incorrect equipment, and the other techs were just quietly correcting it for her. Easier than calling honestly, and what I would have done if my day hadn't been so light. The manager told my boss that he had let Karen go and that she would no longer be an issue. Apparently, I had saved the hospice company thousands of dollars in potential malpractice and neglect lawsuits.